Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to Predatory Exotics. Today we're going to be doing a care guide with a bit of breeding guide at the end for the Senodactylus Sthenodactylus, also known by its many common names: Dune gecko, sand gecko, Liechtenstein's short-fingered gecko, elegant gecko, and plenty others. So this is obviously going to be a care guide specifically catered towards Senodactylus Sthenodactylus, but there's quite a few species in the genus of Senodactylus, so it is going to be relevant to a lot of them. So if you have stuff like the Senodactylus doriae, please stay tuned because you're going to get so much information out of this. So moving on to the description of these super awesome little geckos, they only measure a few inches in length, so they're the perfect micro gecko if you don't have a lot of space to keep reptiles. As you'll see when we move on to the housing section of this video, you can keep them in relatively small tanks due to their small size. They come in a variety of different colours. This is all one species, and we have anything from orange to yellow to beige and everything in between. They have super interesting different patterns. As you can see in the close-up shots here, they're marbled with lots of different colours, and their eyes are one of the most fascinating parts about them. They have these gold eyes where you can almost see the veins in them. They have that cat eye pupil so that they can see in the dark efficiently, and we'll move on to a bit later about their behaviours and how they are nocturnal, and that affects their feeding habits. So moving on to where these geckos are from, because we want to keep these as effectively as possible in captivity, we need to know where they're from in the world. So the Sthenodactylus genus is from hot and arid areas in the world, North Africa and the Middle East. The Senodactylus Sthenodactylus is effectively from Libya, Egypt, Palestine, Israel and Lebanon. So very hot, dry areas of the world. If it didn't give away that they were sand geckos, they live on sand, as you will see. So effectively, they're not going to have a lot of moisture in their natural environment. We'll talk about where they get their moisture from in terms of feeding, but from their natural environment, it's going to be a lot of sea mist. So we'll talk about how sea mist affects their daily lives when we go on to their daily care. So this is our setup for our dwarf sand geckos. This is an Exoterra 45 centimeter cube, which is a 1.5 foot cube. They are relatively simple to set up. They're simple creatures. If anyone says on this video that they can't be kept on sand, go look at the wild. Sand is the perfect substrate for these dwarf sand geckos because they're completely adapted to live on sand dunes in North Africa and the Middle East. They basically hide in whatever small cracks and crevices they can, from small bits of rock to small pieces of vegetation. So we've decorated our enclosure with lots of bits of wood and slate. The slate can actually absorb some of the heat and radiate it out, and they can hide, which is very important if you have a colony. You want lots of hiding places so that there isn't any aggressive behaviour between individuals. So as you can see in the tank, we actually have a small water dish. This isn't essential because they are from very hot, arid climates. They wouldn't have access to standing water all of the time, but in a captive environment, it is a good idea to. You'll also see the watermarks on the side of the glass. This is because we spray them down a couple times a week. They won't always drink from standing water, so it is a good idea to spike that humidity up in the mornings, probably about twice a week, and it basically acts like mist or a morning dew in the desert, that they can lick the moisture off of the items in the cage. So that is quite an important part of your care routine, and something that is a little bit more nuanced that you should do. So now we'll talk about heating and lighting your sand geckos. They are from North Africa and the Middle East, so obviously they are going to need It's hot and very light. So we'll talk about lighting first. We have a Arcadia UVB bulb. They don't actually need the desert bulbs that you might use for a bearded dragon because they are a nocturnal species. They're not going to be out in the heat of the day. They might catch some of the morning sun and some of the evening sun. So a forest 6% is actually a great option to choose for these dwarf sand geckos. They do like it hot though. In the middle of the day it is going to be very hot. So we keep them at an average temperature of about 31-32 degrees Celsius in their hotspot. They don't need it as hot as you might think because they're not out in the middle of the day. Some care guides say you can keep them between 35 to 38 degrees, which is actually a little bit too hot. You don't want to keep them that hot because they're going to avoid the heat of the day. And so you can keep them about 31, 32 with the cool spot going down to just above room temperature, maybe about 24 degrees Celsius. At night, you need a temperature drop. The deserts get quite cold. So these go down to 20 degrees at night. So basically in our reptile room, at least, it doesn't require any extra heating in the night, they're perfectly fine at room temperature. So you've just seen how and where to keep them. Now we're going to talk about how you feed these little creatures. Obviously they are a micro gecko, so you're going to need micro foods. So we feed it a mixture of different items, but it has to be relative to their body size. As with most reptiles, you want to keep it to the space between their eyes, and obviously the space between their eyes is very small. So the ideal feeder insect that's going to be your staple is the second instar crickets. This is one step up from them hatching, so it's going to be perfect for all of your adult geckos. The other thing you can feed them is micro mealworms. You might have to get a little bit picky with these to get the smallest ones, and you don't want to feed too many because they do have that hard outer shell. But that is going to be the staples of them, and you want to feed them in the evening. They are a nocturnal species, so as the sun sets, you can put them into its tank and you can watch them all run around and eat their bugs, because it is pretty fascinating to watch when you have multiple in the tank and they're running after all the crickets and catching them. So you know what to feed your awesome little geckos. Now you need to know how much you're going to feed these little geckos. So as a rule of thumb, you want to feed about 4 to 6 prey items per feeding. Obviously that increases as you get a bigger colony. So when we have 4 geckos, we're probably feeding 25 to 30 crickets each time we feed. And that is going to be about 3 times a week. So it works out about every other day or every third day you're going to feed these creatures. So they're nice and happy and enriched, because the crickets are really going to give them a lot more enrichment than the mealworms, because the mealworms are going to be in a bowl as opposed to crickets. You can let free roam. One thing to note is the small crickets do get out sometimes, so make sure you have a secure enclosure or tape up any of the small escape holes so your feeder insects aren't running around your house. So we did talk about the UV lighting when we talked about the tank, so that they can utilize all the vitamins and minerals that you're giving them. So the vitamins and minerals you give them is very important. You're going to want to dust these probably every other feeding with a calcium supplement. So we're currently using this Komodo calcium and vitamin supplement that has D3 added, but it's good to not buy the same one every time. It's good to mix it up. Maybe buy this, Exoterra, and some of the more popular brands like Zoomed, and then Arcadia is a very good one. But mix it up, because each one is going to have a slightly different composition of minerals and vitamins. And like I just said, it's very important to give them as much variety and as much naturalistic feeding opportunities as possible. You can also add in stuff like vitamin A, and Arcadia have a great selection of different vitamins and minerals you can give them. It's going to keep them happy and healthy, because unfortunately we can't provide as many feeder insects as they would catch in the wild, and obviously they're going to have all different nutritional content. So we do have to boost it in captivity, but it's no problem, and they'll survive perfectly happy with a few supplements. So I keep mentioning you can keep these animals in colonies. Actually, these are the perfect communal species. A lot of reptiles you have to keep singly because they will either fight or they don't get along together, but these are perfect communal species. We have 4 at the moment, but you can keep up to maybe 10 geckos as long as you have the correct ratios. You want multiple males for breeding, as this will actually entice breeding. We'll talk about breeding in a later section in the video. And you want multiple females. That is the most important part. You do not want one male to one female. You always want double the amount of females to males. This means that they won't be overbred and there won't be too much competition for mating. So now you know how to keep the Senodactylus Sthenodactylus. You need to know, is it actually the right gecko for you? So there's a few things to consider when we consider, is the Sthenodactylus the correct gecko for you? And that is handleability, the availability, and the cost of these geckos. So there's 2 ways to look at it. These geckos right in front of me are ones we produced here at Predatory Exotics. That is why they are so docile and calm. So we have 2 wild caught and 2 captive bred at the moment that we've decided to keep as part of our colony. And as you can see, captive bred is the way to go. These ones have been handled since they came out of the egg, so they're very used to handling. And it's perfect for kids. We take them to reptile shows and kids can handle these and there's no problem. The only thing is they are very delicate. You can't squeeze them, grab them. You kind of have to pick them up very gently and place them on your hand. So they are a great gecko to handle as long as you can find captive bred options. So how easy is it to find these geckos in the UK or the US for that matter? captive bred is quite difficult. We luckily have bred about 20 geckos over a few years, and we've actually sold them to our local pet shops so they can distribute them to happy customers all around the UK. But wild caught, unfortunately, is the main one to go to. Here in the UK, we're obviously quite close to North Africa geographically, so a lot of wild caught ones come over. They're still not the easiest to find, but you can find wild caught specimens and then breed your own captive bred ones. In terms of captive bred, they are going to cost you a bit more than the wild caught. The wild caught will probably set you back only around £30, whereas the captive bred ones are going to be up towards that £50 mark. But it's definitely worth spending the extra money, not only because we're taking animals from the wild that could have diseases, but the captive bred ones, as you can see here, are a lot more handleable and a lot more fun to keep as pets. So next we are going to be talking about breeding. Obviously this is for the slightly more advanced keepers that have been keeping them for a few years, but you need to know what could be the eventual possibility of you keeping a colony of sand geckos. So let's move on to how to breed them and how to incubate them. So obviously we talked about the section down there about what ratios to keep in your group of males and females, but that means obviously you are going to get eggs eventually. The females will lay 2 eggs about every 6 weeks once they're of breeding age, and you are going to have to incubate these probably to have the most successful hatch rate. You can leave them in the tank, but unfortunately there isn't really enough humidity in the tank, especially where they have been laid. We found that they lay them quite a lot in the basking spot, and that isn't good because the eggs will crack and dry out. So you're going to want to get yourself an incubator. There's several different brands you can buy. There's egg-shaped ones which actually look pretty funky, but this one is the Exoterra one. This one's great, and we've hatched about 20 sand geckos in the past using this method. So it's definitely worth investing in these. They do run up quite a bit cost on Amazon, but you can get them off a place like Facebook for people that aren't breeding it anymore, so you can pick up a cheap one if you're looking to do that. But that cost kind of goes down if you keep more reptiles, because you can use this for loads of different stuff. The temperatures that we'll talk about in a minute, we incubate viper gecko eggs and many others at the same temperature, so it really is a useful piece of kit. So there's several ways you can set up the inside of your incubator, but the way we found most effective you can see on the screen. We have a bed of vermiculite, which is going to keep in the humidity. That means your eggs won't dry out and crack, but we don't want our eggs to go moldy, so we keep them on sand inside a little tub. That means the eggs are on dry sand, but the air around them is humid. This stops the eggs molding, and that means they can develop perfectly. So how long do they actually develop for? Online, you will see pretty much everywhere it says 90 days, which is 3 months. We found that it can vary a lot more than that, depending on temperature or just randomly. I think the longest one we had was either 4 or 5 months, and we just didn't touch it. We left it and it hatched out, and it was a perfectly healthy gecko. So even if it goes past those 90 days, leave it in the incubator, check on it every day, and you might have a baby gecko way later than you thought. So if you've got a keen eye, you'll be able to tell if the egg is fertilized, if it's good, if it's bad. Basically all eggs are going to come out white, and then within about 2 weeks they'll actually get a pinkish hue. This pinkish hue is actually the blood vessels developing inside the egg, so keep an eye out for that. If it doesn't, it will go a creamy color and you'll kind of see it, and it just won't look good, and then it will probably get mold on it because there isn't anything living inside it. But if you've got pink eggs after a couple of weeks, you know you're on the road to success. So let's talk about the steps from retrieving your egg from the tank to monitoring it to make sure it hatches perfectly. So these are hard-shelled eggs, not like ball python snake eggs that have that leathery texture. These ones are thin, hard-shelled eggs, so you have to be very careful. We tend to scoop them up with a teaspoon and then put them directly onto that sand in the incubator. That way it minimalizes the risk of them cracking. If you are feeling confident, or if you are an experienced keeper with eggs and stuff like that, you can candle the eggs, obviously not with a real candle. Do it with your phone torch. You can put the egg on your phone torch and you might be able to see the embryo develop, but you really want to be careful with this, especially if you're doing it after it's been laid for a while, because the air pocket at the top of the egg needs to stay at the top of the egg. Otherwise the embryo could drown and you'll lose the baby. So just to be safe, make sure you put that egg from where it was laid into the incubator in the exact same position it was to make sure it is perfectly fine and you don't muck with it at all. So hopefully after 90 days or so, you have your baby dwarf sand geckos, which is very exciting and it doesn't get old the more you hatch. But now you have a baby gecko that's going to be the size of your fingernail. So how are you going to keep it? How are you going to feed it? So for the first week of its life, so you want to keep it in a cricket tub, not very small container, with paper towel. This is so that it can absorb the rest of its yolk. It may not look like it, but inside is actually full of yolk still, so you want to leave it to absorb that before it has its first meal. You're then going to feed it a few micro crickets, literally first instart baby crickets, which can be hard to get hold of at your local pet shop, so it's best to probably order them online, and then they will eat these for a few weeks until you can get them on slightly bigger crickets and mini mealworms. And we've had great success with that strategy. And then they can go in something like an Exoterra 30-30-30, something like that. I don't know if you can see that on the screen. And keep them successfully from there before they can be either added to your colony or sold on to your friends, family, or another pet shop. So we haven't gone into too much detail about the breeding of these dwarf sand geckos because it is just a general care guide. But if you have any questions, comment down below because we're more than happy to answer them. And if you do want a full breeding guide that is a bit more detail about things to look for breeding and how it goes, just ask in the comments and we might do a breeding video for you. So I hope you have enjoyed watching our Senodactylus Sthenodactylus care guide. Obviously, hopefully this is the right gecko for you, but if you do have any more questions that we may not have covered in the video, please comment down below because we are more than happy, because we want to make sure as many people as possible know about this gecko because it's definitely an up-and-comer gecko, especially in the UK. Also, leave a like, subscribe, because there's more content not only about these micro geckos but other micro geckos and other reptiles as well. So hope you have a good day and we'll see you in the next video. Bye guys.